Hello and welcome to Master Auto's Workshop. This video is a continuation in the series of making scabbards. Now, I'm an amateur scabbard maker and a lot of people make much better scabbards than I do, but they're not making videos. But today's video is going to be on a subject in which I am a subject matter expert, and that is scabbard colors. But before we go down that rabbit hole, I want to talk about a scabbard that I have in the works right now, because I'm going to make some future videos on covering the scabbard with leather, making the suspension, and I may do a separate video on the chape, although I may include the chape in the next video. I want to answer a question that some people have asked me about tools used to make the wood core. You use whatever tools are available to you, whatever makes it work. If I made a video on using a CNC machine to carve out the cavity for the sword, that would not be useful to 99.999% of the people out there. So the previous video on making the wood core used some very simple tools. But let me talk about what I did with this wood core. First, I used pine, which is probably not a great idea because of the knots, but I'm going to try it and deal with it because pine is soft and easy to use. So far it's working out fine. Let me show you what I've done so far. So after I carved out the inner cavity and glued in the lining and glued the two boards together, I took it to the table saw and I ripped along the edges to get it to the right width. Then I went to my brand new bandsaw and I cut the shape, roughly cut the shape of the tip. Then I went to my planer. I got a new planer. The motor was burned out and I thinned it out in this direction. And then I took it over to the router with a round off bit and I rounded it off. And so here's where I am now. Let me show you where I've gotten to with these tools. You can see it's pretty close to being the correct dimensions. I'll take it now to the 4x36 belt sander, which I think most people have if you're a home craftsman, and I will sand this down to 1/8 of an inch thick and get it to the proper proportions. You can see I still have the tip right here so that I know where to grind the point. That'll be one of the last things I take off. So let's get started on scabbard colors. When making a scabbard, I'm sure all of us have asked, what is the period appropriate color for a scabbard and what color do I want my scabbard? And then we've gone on to the paintings and illuminated manuscripts to look at scabbard colors from the appropriate time period. But I took it one step further and asked myself, what leather dyes were available in the medieval period to color the scabbards? So I embarked on a 5-year journey to identify all the medieval manuscripts that have leather dye recipes, and then to reproduce all of the medieval leather dyes. I identified 9 medieval manuscripts from the 8th to the 16th centuries that had leather dye recipes and were also translated into English. There were more than 100 leather dye recipes in these manuscripts. The problems with these medieval leather dye recipes is they're incomplete and they're written in ancient medieval terminology that is obscure, metaphorical, and allegorical. So I spent a number of years performing entomological research trying to identify all of the reagents for these leather dye recipes. I discovered that grain is not grain and bloodwort is not bloodwort. I had to figure out the meanings of words like whiting, little apples, alum feces, nurprum, Roman vitriol, quicklime. I had to figure out units of measurement that no longer exist and even back then, 1 ounce in Italy was vastly different from 1 ounce in France. I spent a few years running hundreds of experiments trying to reproduce the ancient leather dyes, trying to fill in the missing blanks, trying to figure out why they would want to rub burned sheep dung on the leather. Slowly, over time, I finally got into the minds of medieval dyers. I started to figure out why they did what they did. I began to understand the chemistry of making medieval color. So now we can truly understand what colors were available to medieval craftsmen when they were dyeing leather scabbards. So here's the bottom line. These are the colors you can use to dye your scabbards. This is the red palette. The dyes were made from Brazilwood, cochineal, bloodwort, madder, and lac. This is the blue palette. The dyes were made from indigo, woad, elderberry, and buckthorn. This is the green palette. The dyes were made from buckthorn, indigo, woad, weld, verdigris, and saffron. Sometimes there was some overdying with blues and yellows to get greens. This is the purple palette. The dyes were made from Brazilwood, elderberry, and buckthorn. This is the yellow palette. The dyes were made from saffron, turmeric, unripe buckthorn, and weld. This is the black palette. The dyes were made from an iron tannin acid reaction like vinegrin, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. This is the gray palette. The dyes were made in a way similar to black, except with the addition of Roman vitriol or copper sulfate to dampen the black reaction. And finally, we'll end with brown. You may have noticed that there aren't any brown dyes. That's because in the medieval paradigm of color, brown was not a color. People didn't dye things brown. Brown was the, quote, color, unquote, of things that were not colored. Well, that's it. Hope you enjoyed my presentation on medieval leather dye colors as they apply to sword scabbards. Have fun.